explain this dilemma is always.
Very quickly, and then I'll let Rohith have a chance to speak. We have to work on improving our human capital. That implies at every level. And one of the reasons many students who graduate don't have work is surveys suggest 50% of them, 50% of our college graduates are unemployable. In other words, they haven't learned enough to get a job that they're supposed to be qualified for. Civil engineers who don't know civil engineering. And so we need to remedy a fair amount there. And that is part of the process of strengthening the education process right through. And hopefully at the end of the strengthening, if you put a kind of supply chain, you got to strengthen it at the beginning, reduce malnutrition, reduce, teach kids more before at the early stage, improve it at the middle, get better schools. We have brought everybody to school, but we don't teach them well. Get better quality. We need to figure out how to do that. We talk about various ways in the book. Get better colleges, but get better universities which train the teachers that will teach in the colleges. All along, but that last part, get better universities, is going to be where the intellectual property can be created if we get them. Now, sometime we can address the issue of money. Where's the money going to come from? We'll come to that. But the point is, we need improvements across the board. And they will address every part of the employment problem in the sense that if you get more trained workers, we'll have companies coming to India to look for those workers. The reason we don't have so many is because they say, well, we just can't find, we hear this refrain again and again from entrepreneurs, we can't find the skilled workers we need.
So, interestingly, I'll come to you, Rohith, in a while. Your co-author your colleague at Chicago, Luigi, in your conversation over the book, in that podcast, he mentioned something very interesting that caught my attention. He says that, India's problem with respect to US is rather simple. All that India probably needs to do is reallocate more resources into education sector, because given the reputation and recognition associated with education, everything else will follow. So do you think that the solution is creating more IITs, more IIMs? Is the problem that simple?
It's not. I don't want to minimize the nature of the problem, right? It's not also just a problem of funding, because you can throw more funding, employ more teachers, but if they don't come to school to teach, it's not valuable, right? Or if they have big classes where they can't follow individual students. We need a transformation in this process, but the first thing we need is political leaders to pay attention to the problem. If they don't pay attention to the problem, you're not going to fix it in the first place.
So I'll come to that in a while. Rohith, do you want to add something to?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the question you asked, I think it is a rather complicated, I think also counterintuitive question that you asked, and I think it took us a while to kind of wrap our head around it about what is it that India should do and so on. I think we broadly reached the conclusion that that just because nobody has done it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And I think if you read, the famous book from a person from your city, Raghuram, India After Gandhi, it's kind of eye-opening when at least when I read it for the first time, where repeatedly, for example, I'm talking about the political domain, the world didn't give India a chance in terms of being a democracy. Right? He kind of repeats that fact over and over again in his book. That why? Because India is the only poor and consistent democracy in the world for a country of its size. No other country was consistently democratic at the per capita level of incomes that India was. And I think broadly what we are saying is that it is a poverty of intellect and ambition to just follow the path that has already been followed. And obviously it's not easy. And I think a lot of the ingredients that will go into creating that path are sort of actually independent of services manufacturing in this debate. That's what I think Raghu is trying to emphasize with education, right? You're not choosing, you're just basically trying to create a basic workforce. Coming to the dilemma part is that what we are saying is that this should not be your best case aspiration for the country, that we should start here in the valley, as Raghu was saying, and then move up. especially because you've had a head start at the two ends of the valley, and especially because your political, societal ingredients are kind of tailored to being better at the two ends of the valley than the middle, at the plateaus than the middle. And finally, what I think is slightly underappreciated in this discussion is that if you I mean, it's obviously an audacious ask, and we're not trying to minimize, but if you're actually able to do it, you can then also dictate where the lower end goes. Does it stay in India? Does it go to which state in India? Once you actually own the intellectual property, you could be the one sending manufacturing to Bangladesh or Vietnam and so on, if you actually think in those dimensions. Jobs, there is very good research. So that's one reason why jobs will stay in India, even in the manufacturing sector. There's also very good recent research that shows for every high skill job, for example, a lot of people sitting here, that you create in India, 4 to 5 low skill jobs of decent quality get added. So the externality effects are not small, the multiplier effects are not small.
So both of you mentioned the importance of the state in pushing forward the public good. Yeah, and economists from the break of the dawn have been, be it Amartya Sen or be it anybody, been trying to say that invest more in public good, healthcare or education sector, invest more. But somehow, the government or be it any party at power, it doesn't. They somehow it's a hard sell to them. And both of you have an experience of working with and as a policymaker. So my question is that how does one prevent a policymaker from getting tempted with these short-term, goals, but rather invest in these long-term, issues, with investing more in public goods?
So what is anything new we bring to Amartya Sen's constant demand for better public goods, for investing capabilities? We think you need governance reform also to make it happen. You can't keep saying this is important. It is important, but it takes 10 years to show up. I won't do it. If it's important, but my constituencies can see the results very quickly, and my constituency is going to hammer on my door if I don't do something about it. And that's why we keep saying decentralization is an important element of the answer. If you look at the states which are doing much better on education, they typically are states that have decentralized much more. A classic recent example being Delhi. And so again and again we say it has to be a whole of country approach. And yeah, you might say, oh, how are you going to get the country to decentralize? Well, we hope that once we put all these ideas together, then parties can start thinking about platforms which put together these ideas in a bigger whole. I think part of the problem is what Rohith just mentioned, the poverty of imagination. We can't think of how to move forward beyond the Revli debate. How can we actually do something which kickstarts us? And Gurcharan Das's point, India sort of works at night, or India grows at night, I think still holds, because government doesn't really do what is necessary to support. But going forward, it has to. Otherwise, we will not be compared in the global economy. And therefore, you need a different form of governance, you need a different form of government, and you need, obviously, the private sector to kick in this process.
You wanted to add something, because the connection between decentralization and creativity may not be very natural.
I think there's different ends of the vision in some sense. I think to your question about the goods, the public goods, I think there is kind of a broken link between the people who can provide it and the people who are demanding it. I think to make that link is really our responsibility. By our, I mean the media, the intellectuals, the people who kind of have to relentlessly pursue this. What's the broken link? So the way we think about it is that there is a demand, right? All of you looked at the protests when the army introduced the Agniveer, right? Like how much it affects people's lives when we just slightly change hiring norms in government jobs. There is a simmering demand. You travel anywhere in India, you see people talk about jobs, and so what you're saying is that, well, if this is true, then why are we not seeing a response? Because we are, if anything, a very, very hotly contested electoral democracy. And I think both sides of the spectrum are a little bit caught in, they've become prisoners of their own instruments, and the instruments are broadly reservations in government jobs and what you just mentioned as what is now being mentioned as freebies. And as I said, I think it is our responsibility because the demand exists. The demand is a bit diffused. It becomes concrete in sporadic ways when you see these protests, but it's not consistent enough. And for it to be consistent enough, we need better debate and better political entrepreneurship.
So
No, but let me just add to that. I mean, the point about decentralization is not about creativity. It's about creating the public goods. Why would politicians respond? They will respond if they can be turfed out. That's one. That's why we have elections. But they'll also respond when they can get the benefits of responding quickly. Today, if somebody in Lucknow wants to change the educational system through that gigantic bureaucracy, what comes out at the end will come out 10, 15 years from now and will be a caricature of what they started with, even if they're the most well-meaning education minister in the state, accompanied by the well-meaning bureaucrat from the IAS. How you make this actually work is get much less of a distance between the people who are getting the benefits and the people who are providing the benefits. That's the decentralization point. If today I'm in a district and I have supreme control over educational spending, I can possibly see some effects by spending in the right way, but also the district people know who to blame if the schools aren't performing. They know who to contact if the teacher doesn't show up. They don't have to go to Lucknow, they just go to the local district headquarters. And think about decentralization even further to the panchayat. If you decentralize the primary schools, the point is decentralization of funds, functions, and functionaries. We've talked about it a long time. It's not happening. We're growing bigger as a country and less able to provide the public goods. If we decentralize more, there will be a holding of the authorities' feet to the fire. And that will be a good thing. We will get more of it.
So if I read it correctly, you're saying empower panchayats, empower people on the ground. And that brings me to a question that's on my mind when I read the book and I thought, you can put lots of checks and balances to ensure that the government gets and ends up doing what you want. But somehow I felt that the real challenge in the society is not that. It is the fact that we have lack of intent to uphold certain values like inclusivity and transparency. And somehow government is just a reflection of the society that it elects. So no matter how many checks and balances we put in place, without this intent to uphold those values, do you think that it will be hard to change the conversation around public goods or anything for that matter?
I think...
So basically what I'm trying to ask is any suggestions or recommendations that you may have for the society and the culture at large?
Look, if you pose the problem the way you're posing it, almost always the answer is nothing can be done. We are messed up as a society, we cannot change. But very few societies are so messed up they cannot change. And as the need arises, think about education. We write about it. Myron Wiener used to say the reason India doesn't focus on universal education, which is a travesty as a democracy, we don't want universal education, is because of the caste system. We have a caste system where the higher caste don't want the lower caste to get educated because it will make them uppity and make them, in a sense, want better things, while what we need them for is agricultural labor, right? There are many people who've written about this in other countries, but he was making the point for India. If that remained true, we would not have even the kind of education system we have today. What changed? Well, one change was demand. We liberalized, there was now a demand for more workers outside of agriculture, and so there was a need for education, and we started, if you look at liberalization, and you look at the number of years of education, they are strongly correlated. We started educating more. Now, there are other correlations. We saw the emergence of middle and lower caste governments, which also, in some ways, pushed education. So, things change. And we have to somehow believe, if we are to improve as a society, that the arc is always towards progress. And part of what we're doing with this book is to set, some additional ideas out there. so that we can debate this. And that's why we're talking to the smart people in this room with the hope that many of you carry this, some of what you may not agree with everything we're saying, but let's start the debate.
All right, so sitting now that we're here in Bangalore, the hub of innovation and services, I wanted to pivot the discussion towards entrepreneurship and creativity. And we talk about the role of government that's needed. We talked about regulatory systems. We also talked about education system becoming better so that we can, ensure people think outside the box. What are your recommendations for the entrepreneurial community sitting here and out there at large so that they can be the trailblazer of this growth story of India?
I think we just need. There's nothing original in this. We're saying, we need just much bigger volume, right? So I think when we describe the examples in the book, it's at the outset what we say is that we want this to be an optimistic narrative about the potential of the India growth story. But where do you get volume from? I think people who are doing very cool things in Bangalore, but we need many more in cities and people doing entrepreneurial things. And I think the one thing that we really emphasize in the book, and this is something the existing entrepreneurial class, I think, is already doing to some extent, but needs to be allowed to do more by governance reforms actually, is a greater emphasis on collaboration between university research and industry. There is absolutely no substitute for primary research. For example, Yusuf Hamid, who we talked to and is covered in the book, in the Cipla story, is a remarkable story. How he, for example, emerges as a leader in rescuing a large number of people in Africa from AIDS because he made the medicine cheaply available. He tells us, for example, that he has hit a ceiling because going beyond this as a company, as an entrepreneur, as a global leader actually in this, he needs primary research. He doesn't have the capital to do it. He has the commercial acumen to do it. He has the ability to translate primary research into commercialized products, but he cannot do the primary research. And so we can, so one thing we keep emphasizing, what I meant was that entrepreneurs should be allowed to do it. I think there are lots of entrepreneurs in India who want to contribute towards endowing chairs, endowing money in universities, but this needs to happen on a war footing, where we just set up many more universities like the Indian Institute of Science, and also encourage their collaboration with industry to commercialize the products.
I see. I think you also mentioned in the book something which caught my attention, which was that firms in the services sector don't really need to scale to succeed. If you could help us understand that bit a little, for the reason that most of us here in the audience would appreciate that many entrepreneurs succumb to the pressure to scale. And if you could help us understand, where are you coming from when you say that it's not necessary to scale?
So, one of the problems in manufacturing is that scale brings productivity. You have bigger scale, you become more able to use bigger machines across the process, you become more productive. So that implied that you went for export-led growth, because to get the size of demand you needed to export. Example we give in the book is top hats, right? Let's say you want to manufacture top hats. Well, how many fancy people wear top hats in India? Maybe a couple at the race course, but I don't think there are many, and they look odd, right? But there are many across the world who wear top hats, in the US, in the UK. So if you were a top hat manufacturer, you would almost surely focus on exports because that would give you scale. Now the point with services, however, is the economies of scale sometimes can be, don't necessarily need to be there. If you have a consultant who's really good, they don't necessarily need 5 other consultants to be with them. They themselves can produce high quality. A designer on their own can produce high quality. So what is happening to some extent is you don't need to grow over a long period of time to reach the scale which gives you the kind of productivity which gives you global reach. A good consultant, a good designer, a good creative artist can reach the world today just putting their shingle out there and saying, I'm available for the world. The example of that is Tilfi, which is a relatively small outfit, relatively small number of saris, But because to some extent the creativity and that is at the center of Tilfi is not necessarily something that goes into scale, it can actually sell across the world right off.
So I just wonder then, why do most of entrepreneurs succumb to this pressure of scale? Maybe, yeah.
I think because this is the cookie cutter model, right? That works. We're not trying to say scale is not important. What we're trying to say in the book is, for a large subset of services, scale is not essential, especially right at the outset. So obviously, if you want to make global products, scale is in some senses important. But because of the nature of products focused on services, you don't always need scale. You can actually, be small for a relatively long period of time and yet be highly profitable.
All right, I think the audience is waiting to ask questions, but I have a few before I let the audience ask. You've been doing the rounds around the country, taking your book around different cities, meeting different people. So the question is the following: what is it that you've learned or unlearned during these past few days that you probably wanted to put in the book and you would like your future readers to know?
You want to take that?
No, I would like you to answer too.
Okay. Look, I think the problem in the environment we're in today is that people want to, we're a divided society, and people want to attack what they don't attack. What did you say? Identities.
Yes.
I said engage with the idea, not the identity.
Yeah, they want to engage with the identity rather than the idea. And so we're going to great pains to say this is not an attack. This is a bunch of ideas, and you should be willing to embrace them also if you care for the nation. If you don't care, that's a different issue. But if you care for the nation, you should be willing to debate this, because we're talking about accelerating growth. But to accelerate growth, first you have to see what are we not getting right. If you say everything is fine in this perfect world, and we're the best nation in the world, we're guru to the world, everybody respects us, we have nothing to learn, we don't have a place to start the conversation, right? You have to accept there are some, and we have met audiences who believe this. So it's, I know you're a cosmopolitan audience, there's a variety of people here, but I've met audiences who actually don't want to hear that we have 35% malnutrition. They don't accept that as a number. If we don't even accept the basic facts, we can't have a conversation. And one of the things we're trying to say is, you don't have to necessarily dismiss the other side, engage with the idea, and then we can have a proper conversation. You can tell me you're all wrong, we have to go back to the old system, we have to look like China, we will go strongly. Fine, we can have a debate. But let's accept some basic facts in having that debate.
How about you? Did you meet anybody interesting that you want your audience or your future readers to know?
I think, we've been meeting a very large class of interesting people. I think just taking off from Raghu said, I think we have a line in the book, and I think we said it a couple of places also, that which is a terminology that is being used quite actively these days, is the terminology of a Vishwa Guru. Yeah. And we sort of say that, technically speaking or literally speaking, a Vishwa Guru is someone like kind of who's a net exporter of ideas. This is the economist parlance of how they would define. And we find it interesting, at least like I said, I find it interesting that when we say that actually, broadly speaking, India is a net importer of ideas. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that we were never, the next line we write in the book is that, we have exported many ideas in spiritualism to the whole world, and we describe that in detail in the book. But if you look at it as a proud but rational Indian, as we speak today, we are a net importer of ideas, and the aspiration must be to be a net exporter of ideas. Somehow, the word, I don't know, just a challenge to the word Vishwa Guru, people get very animated in a certain way instead of engaging in a rational way.
All right, so last question, a futuristic question to both of you. What does India after 100 years look like to you? At the Amrit Kal, you've shown what...
100 years from now or
100 years since independence. 100 years since independence. At the end of the Amrit Kal.
So, look, before I get there, just one. Because we were not sure we would have a debate, instead of a Mama Tutu kind of sort of interaction, we actually have a chapter in the book, chapter 13, which is modeled after the father of the nations, Hind Swaraj, where he has a dialogue between him and a critic. The
Reader and the editor.
reader and the editor. And we sort of take the, with all due humility, we are the editor and the guy from the other side is the reader. And we address a whole bunch of issues, obviously in the way we would have a debate with somebody from the other side who's willing to listen. We're assuming they're willing to listen and not saying you're anti-national, you're this and you're that. And I would suggest you read it because it throws some light on some of our current debates. But we didn't want that at the beginning of the book because we wanted, in a sense, to have initially, what is our model? What are we thinking about the way forward? What is the role of democracy in our vision? Why do we need to strengthen democracy rather than weaken it? Those were all the cases we made up front in the book because, as Rohith always says, his teacher taught him, you need a model to beat a model. There's a very powerful model at the center today. We need a model to beat that model, to offer an alternative. And we would hope the center would move towards that model, but we need that model out there. So what is my hope for the next, Amrit Khan? Well, I hope we become an intellectual property creating giant. We become a society with extensive debate. We argue with each other all the time, but we don't essentially point a finger at somebody who criticizes us and say you're anti-national. We talk about ideas, we debate them. We are the argumentative Indian, but we're not the accusative Indian.
That's a lovely place to be. Rohith, any few thoughts?
I just add a footnote to that is that we were so excited by the moment we kind of said it to ourselves. This thing about kind of doing. I think initially we would call the book, Hind Swaraj for the 21st century. So, like, we were so excited by this idea that we'd write the whole book as a Q&A. But thankfully, our very sensible editor at Penguin said, "This is a great idea. Maybe do one chapter on this." So as Raghu said, we wanted to lay out our model. And our model is basically, as everybody here, we aspire to be as the book is out in Hindi also. So as in Hindi it says a Samridh Bharat, but one where for us, which is one of full of creative ideas.
All right, thank you so much for those closing remarks. And if you do recall, if there's anything that you didn't touch up and you wanted to, please feel free to add. Let's take some questions.
I have a question.
All right, where's the mic? And I hope